Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the Wicked Ones role-playing game. If you haven't seen the other parts of this review, please check out the playlist in the description below. In this role-playing game, the player characters participate as the bad guys, the orcs, the goblins, the zombies, the lizardmen, all of those creatures that inhabit dungeons, and the player characters are the ones trying to conquer the land while fending off pesky adventurers. This time we are going to talk about sandboxes. A dungeon exists in a rather localized region. Its static nature means it can only affect a limited area. You work together to create a sandbox, a small region full of dominoes for you to knock over. First, you choose a map, whether from this book or another source, then define a series of light, neutral, and dark factions that exist within that sandbox. It's important that the region is local. Keeping the travel distance from the dungeon to the edge of the map to about 2 to 4 days is ideal. The Wicked Ones can't spend long periods of time away from their dungeon. Giving minions such an opportunity to turn against you is foolhardy, and your horde would surely be raided while you are gone. Once you have your map, you fill it with factions, the groups that inhabit and control points on the map. This sandbox, filled with factions of varying size, power, and motivation, creates a pressure cooker environment where any interaction is likely to see a faction angered, setting events into motion. Let's talk about factions. Factions are the groups that inhabit the sandbox prior to the arrival of your dungeon. Each sandbox has likely hit a balance, with factions pushing and pulling against each other until their relations have hit some kind of equilibrium. Everything on the map is under some faction's sway, and if you want your dungeon to grow, you're going to have to take that power from another faction. So there are light factions, oftentimes consisting of species such as humans, elves, dwarves, halflings. You also have the dark factions. They often consist of creatures such as goblins, kobolds, orcs, trolls. Then we have neutral factions that usually consist of gnomes, centaurs, ratfolk. These are creatures that don't generally get placed within any of the other two groups. But each faction has their own tongue or language. That is, the light factions speak the light tongue, the dark factions speak the dark tongue, and neutral factions have their own language or one of the other two common tongues. Good and evil aren't the best way to represent factions, as a tribe of evil humans could certainly exist, though they speak the light tongue and never consider cooperating with more monstrous species. Each faction has a clock or two that represent goals the faction is working towards. Between each session, no matter how the cycle of play is progressing, the Game Master should roll the faction's tier as a fortune roll and pick away at their clocks, representing progress towards their goals, and it simulates the world moving. When the clocks fill up, the goal is realized and the Game Master brings this new faction into play. A very cool thing is that this rulebook contains sample factions, or rather sample factions within sandbox environments, so this will surely make for some interesting campaigns, though it's recommended that you actually make your own factions and clocks together, and create your own sandboxes, of course. This helps the players get more invested with the world. Some sandboxes may also need a special rule or two to represent what is unique about them. Now I'm going to mention a bit of these sandboxes and factions quickly, because I don't want to spoil things. For example, we have the Quiet Valley sandbox, with factions such as the Fangtooth Goblins, or the Wood Town, and the Garrison. Then we have the Colonial Seas, with factions such as Pirate Crews, Harpies, and Fire Breathers. We also have the War Zone faction, with groups such as the Dwarven Bunkers, the Wasteland Vermin, and the Minotaur Camp. Then we have the City Sewers, with factions such as the Royal Family, the Merfolk Coven, or the College Arcanum. And each of these factions has their own unique clock to advance their agendas or objectives. For example, maybe at a certain time, a faction is going to withdraw from the front. Maybe another faction is going to expand its territory. Perhaps a distinct faction is going to join up with another faction, or perhaps enter into direct conflict with a specific faction. Then we have details on sandbox creation. The recommended way to play Wicked Ones is to choose a map, then each player helps define the factions that exist within that map. Creating this sandbox together really gets the players involved with the setting and also helps the game master know what kind of monster shenanigans they intend to get up to. Players take turns establishing factions by finding interesting things on the map and detailing what faction occupies that area. It is highly recommended that the player characters are not from that specific area. They should be new arrivals, unaware of all of these factions. This allows for a greater sense of discovery and more complex interactions. And it's very easy to create the sandbox. You have a fully fleshed out process to do so. First, you choose a sandbox map. Then you choose a dungeon location. Next, you detail 2 or 3 tier 4 factions. Then, detail 4 tier 3 factions. And so on, tier 2 factions, tier 1 factions. Then you establish the distance, that is, you choose 2 points on the map and establish how long it takes to travel from one to the other. A day or 2 works best. And finally, you answer some questions about the world. The timing of the sandbox creation depends on the group, but the best way is to choose the sandbox map and the dungeon location before you do anything else. The first session usually covers the initial establishment of your dungeon. The beginning of the second session is great timing for detailing the factions, as you now have more information about your characters and dungeon, so you can make informed choices about what might be fun factions to go up against. Throughout sandbox creation, the game master's job is to push the players through the creation process and ask probing questions about the factions they detail. You're building little hooks that you can later use to pull the factions into the story. After the session you create the sandbox in, the game master gives each faction a clock or 2. From then on, the game master controls the factions and judges how they respond to the events in the game. If you're not sure what a faction would be doing, that's fine. Put a pin in it until that faction is relevant. Then think of what they would have been doing up to that point and make a few rolls on the faction clock to simulate their progress up to that point. Now let me give you an example of a sandbox situation. This scenario is called the world turns. Events are in motion, with the werewolf and the dungeon sowing chaos throughout the land. A lot is up in the air, and there's some clocks about to get finished, so the game master decides to run through the factions together. The game master speaks. So what we've seen so far is the town mostly hysteric over what's happening, with livestock getting slaughtered and people disappearing. That merchant has somehow kept his son's condition secret so far. The mayor's setting a trap with that dire wolf. It's caged in the town center, under guard. Let's start with the farm folk and see what they are doing. The game master rolls 1 die of fortune, farm folk, and gets a mixed result. It fills their angry mob clock. The game master speaks. The farmers have probably been getting the brunt of the werewolf attacks, so they are not so pleased about the mayor that hasn't fixed the problem. What do you think this angry mob does? Ulrot, the orc brute, speaks.
Maybe they go straight for the mayor, demand he steps down?
Crag, the kobold shaman, speaks.
We're sorta pushing the next raid and finishing our master plan here during the next full moon. What if this all happens together?
Ulrot, the orc brute, speaks.
Like, the farmers get together, knowing the full moon is coming and more death along with it? Maybe one of their leaders whips them into an angry mob, and they are just busting into town with demands for the mayor to kill the dire wolf when our next raid happens.
The game master speaks. Oh, I like it. That'll make the town nice and chaotic. Let's see what the town clergy are up to. The game master rolls 2 dice of fortune, town clergy, and gets a failure. It doesn't tick their expand the faith clock. The game master speaks. Looks like they're not doing much. What's their inaction mean? Slem, the Slissic Shadow, speaks.
Maybe they look at this as some kind of divine punishment and have shut the church's doors to the townsfolk. They see this entire situation as a trial the people must overcome on their own.
The game master speaks. It also plays pretty well into how the farm folk built the harvest god shrine earlier. Now let's see what the mayor's doing. The game master rolls 4 dice of fortune, mayor, and gets a critical. It feels their hold off the garrison clock. The game master speaks. Okay, that makes things pretty interesting. A few sessions back, we were talking about how the Baron's troops in the garrison were offering protection but wanted the town to swear loyalty to the Baron. The mayor's back is against the wall with all of the unrest. What does he do? Slime speaks.
The mayor wants the garrison gone. Maybe they leave.
Allrat speaks.
I don't think the garrison captain would just abandon their post with all the craziness happening. She has orders and it's a perfect situation.
Crag, the kobold shaman, speaks.
Oh, I got it. Maybe the mayor blames them for the situation and the townsfolk drive them off.
The game master speaks. Ah, that makes sense. Let's make it opposed fortune rolls. If the garrison wins, they'll stay out of the mayor's way but remain in the region. If the mayor wins, the garrison will be abandoned. The game master rolls 4 dice of fortune, mayor, and gets a success. Then he rolls 3 dice of fortune, garrison, and gets another success. The game master speaks. Any ideas for the tie? We could narrate and roll again. Crag speaks.
What if the garrison drops a tear, sending some soldiers away? They still have a presence, but they are not the threat to the mayor they were.
The game master speaks. That makes a lot of sense. Cool, let's go with that. What's it look like? Crag speaks.
The garrison commander brings a group of troops right up to the mayor's front gate. The mayor comes out, sword in hand, and whistles. Several archers pop up over the wall, arrows trained on the commander. Consider this a final warning. We've had enough of your meddling. The town's behind me. Now back across the river with you.
Allrat speaks.
She didn't expect the mayor to have the backbone for this. Fine, fools. Die by yourselves. We'll be back to pick up the scraps.
The game master speaks. Perfect. So I think just dropping the tier doesn't make sense. The garrison relocates across the river instead. Finally, let's do the elves. The game master rolls 4 dice of fortune, Elven Conclave, and gets a failure. It doesn't tick their offer assistance clock. And this concludes this part of the review for today. As you can see, the sandbox creation process is quite involved and very fun. Everyone cooperates to create the setting where the game takes place, so this saves a lot of time for the game master and gets the players more connected with the world itself. So I think a lot of groups will be surprised as to how the interactions and relationships between the different factions develop and change throughout the course of play. Thank you for watching this part of the review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.